I would always work on the coolest project I can get my hands on. Commercial satellites, the B-2 bomber. I worked on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Hollywood. If you're not familiar with your delusions, then you're deluded, I suppose. You have to be in touch with them, and all the proverbs of life, like, do what your passion is. Those are all contingent on you knowing pretty much what you're good at, or what your delusions are, or what that story is, and accepting it. And otherwise, you just drive yourself nuts.
Have you ever found yourself straddling between two worlds? Maybe not fully fitting into either, but thriving in the in-between? Are you scared of your delusions, or do you think of them as your friends? Do you let them keep you safe and help them guide you towards your North Star? What is your North Star? All things that my guest not only fleshes out today, but has come up with some really brilliant answers for. I'm very excited for you to hear this talk. Hey, what's up? I'm Matt. Welcome to Earth Monster, the storytelling show that celebrates vulnerability and speaks to the darkest, messiest little parts of your heart about the lies that we tell ourselves every day, the stories that we use to get out of bed, the fantasies that we let propel our lives. I call these things necessary delusions, and maybe you do too if you've been listening to the podcast. But even if you call them something else, like dreams or plans or whatever you call them, I believe these are universal. I believe we all carry them with us, and delusion's a little cheeky. So don't get so defensive about it, okay? I am really interested in having a conversation about the biggest ideas that we have had about ourselves and the world around us that have helped to shape or misshape the path that we have taken in life. So if you are the kind of Earth monster who is into this kind of self-reflection, who is looking to make a big change in your life, or maybe you're just trying to build some empathy and feel more connected to the people around you, I hope you will subscribe, because that's what we're doing here. My guest today is Dan. Dan responded to this ad that I post on Craigslist, and full disclosure, this is actually the second time that he and I are speaking, because he did come on once and we recorded a full conversation, and we actually had a great conversation. And then shortly after that, I was sort of thinking about how I wanted to frame these conversations and sort of get more to this point that I'm looking to get to. And sort of simultaneously, Dan went back and listened to some of my old podcast episodes, and he reached back out and he said, "Hey, I have a much better idea of the kind of story that you're looking for, and I'm really familiar with that story. I'd like to come back and tell it." So this is the second time Dan and I are talking, and I'm so glad that we did, because he's a truly insightful guy. He's got a lot of self-awareness, which you can tell he has earned tooth and nail. And I just think that there's some really simple, universal advice that all of us can take from this. So without further ado, let's go now to my conversation with Dan.
I saw you, like I mentioned before. I saw your introduction. I saw what you did with this topic, how you just laid out how your life was framed by a set of events that happened at an early age, and that just that put everything in order for me. I mean, I knew it was in that order, but I didn't know what you wanted. And like, oh yeah, I could tell that story. That's pretty familiar to me, because I kind of dwell in my delusions. My delusions are my friends. They're what keep me out of trouble, basically, keep me on a path. So that's kind of why. I said I got to get back on the show and correct this, because it's a valuable conversation. It really is. And if you're not familiar with your delusions, then you're deluded, I suppose. You have to be in touch with them, and all the proverbs of life, like, do what your passion is, do what you like in life and stuff like that. Those are all contingent on you knowing pretty much what you're good at, or what your delusions are, or what that story is, and accepting it. And otherwise, you just drive yourself nuts, trying to accomplish the unaccomplishable.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So I would love to hear your story. Where do we start?
okay, so how I look at it in retrospect is 9 years old was just this pivotal year for me. For some reason, everything just kind of came together. Then I knew I was an engineer as a kid. I used to take things apart. I used to never put them back together again. But I was just crazy as a very, very young kid, playing with HO cars. I was even like theorizing electrical principles based on these little electrical cars I had. And so I knew what I was going to do. And then I saw Man Land on the Moon, and also that same year, my mom took me to see Buddy Rich play drums. Now, if you're not familiar, Buddy Rich was just the greatest drummer of all time, and he used to play at community colleges when I was a kid. And my mom took me to see that show. I was completely blown away. And then that same year, I see Man Land on the Moon, and I was completely blown away. And then you say to yourself, I'm going to be the greatest drummer that ever played on the moon, without really understanding the consequences of gravity on drumsticks. But that was a side. That
Yeah.
was the guiding light, and as preposterous and ridiculous as that sounded, it shows up a lot. It shows up if you look back in retrospect at the various stages of my life. It shows up. It's like, wow, it's interesting. I actually never got to the moon, but I worked on spacecraft. I became a mechanical engineer. I was a test engineer on the space shuttle, and they paid me to blow stuff up. I mean, my God, what could be greater than that? As a kid, again, playing with electrical toys when you were 8 years old. So, and then again, I played. I went to music school after I went to engineering school. There was a proverb, don't quit your day job, or my parents didn't want me to study music, so I studied engineering, and then afterwards I went and studied music. And then I ended up playing at all the hot clubs in Hollywood. All the Hollywood clubs, the Whiskey A Go Go, the Central Gazaris, um, all Coconut Teaser, all the hot clubs in LA. At a period of time in my life, um, I was working on the space shuttle at the same time I was playing in a prog metal band in Hollywood.
Wow.
That was weird, really weird. What was strange about it is that you didn't really fit in with any one group of people, because there were the rock and roll friends, and you were the guy who was always sober enough to drive, and then there was the aerospace friends who were, frankly, a little boring, but very nice people, of course. But I never really clicked with either crowd, so it was kind of like weird. Okay, so it's kind of lonely, not at the top. I don't want to say lonely at the top, but there's a lonely place in there, because
Yeah.
you don't really sink in with any particular group, or at least the ones you do sink in are fairly rare. So, and they're at least fairly sane. So, I never really got hung up with any big personal problems with people, or stuff like that. So, I've got a lot to be thankful for.
Dan, take me back just for a moment here. Can you unpack? So you're sort of saying that you were 9 years old. It was these little cars you were playing with, Buddy Rich playing the drums, and the moon landing. Can you unpack some of those events for me? Like what made the impact on you? What was like about the moon landing? What like resonated so much in that moment? Can you describe the scene?
Well, you know what? It had a lot to do with scale, because in retrospect, of course, as a 9-year-old, you don't think about these things. But those little cars were very, very small, and electricity and stuff was very, very tiny in my world. And then landing on the moon was enormous.
Yeah.
So you've got 8 or 10 orders of magnitude in dimensions in there. So that's kind of what's really fascinating about it was there was so much. One drove made caused a desire for the other. Going very small made you want to go um, to the large, and then looking at something very large, you had to balance it with something very small. So the larger you look, in order to balance that, you have to look tiny in order to
Yeah.
balance it. You can't have imbalance in your life. So the bigger you or the tinier you look, the more you need, the grand scale, and the grander you look, the more you need the microcosm. So that's kind of an interesting realization I came to somewhere along the line.
So you were kind of making the connection between these little electric cars that you were playing with and the moon landing, and you were like, "Wow, there's sort of the same thing going on here, but they're doing what I'm doing on this massive scale."
Yeah, and scientists to this day are working on that quandary of the universal theories. Like, and does infinite universe and the infinitesimal microcosm, are they one and the same? I mean, it's a huge philosophical question, not spoken by 9-year-olds certainly, but to this day it's being pursued by many. But
Did it make you did it make you feel powerful? The fact that you were already playing with those toys, like what was the personal feeling that was sort of
well, it's a
baked in there?
curiosity, just curiosity. And then again, there weren't I can't say there was anything bad or abnormal about my childhood. It was pretty straightforward. I mean, we weren't wealthy. We were, middle class. If anything, at that time you know was something. Um, and then my dad had a machine shop, so I had to work in the machine shop all the time, which was more mechanical stuff. And then, there wasn't internet back then, just hot rods and motorcycles. So again, more mechanical kind of stuff. We were just sort of, I call it. It's interesting. I just had the revelation right now, this very second. That's what I now call boom space. Everything that's not cyberspace is boom space.
And BoomSpace is your startup, correct?
Right, right. It's in the. I was placed with the idea that it's a place where things go boom. I
Yeah.
mean, there's no
And,
AI on the planet which is going to butter your toast.
and just give us a sort of elevator pitch or quick definition of BoomSpace for
Well,
context.
BoomSpace is the iteration of many, many different startups that have ultimately gone nowhere. But there it's necessary element. It's my necessary creative outlet is to have this. And right now, the latest iteration is BoomSpace, and we look at the value of things is in the intangible assets, not the tangible assets. So our gross national product is. If you make the sandwich yourself, it's not counted under gross national product. But if you have somebody else make it for you and you pay them, then it is part of the gross national product. So that's the tangible. Having somebody else do it for you or doing it yourself is the intangible, your own creativity, and it's just not counted in economics. So it kind of gets whatever's not measured doesn't exist. Okay, so
Yeah.
this is kind of where we are today in a world where we don't measure empathy, we don't measure compassion, we don't measure creativity, or we can't measure these things, and they never get reflected in our monetary system or our exchange system among ourselves. So it's a big diatribe on that topic.
Yeah. What about the drums, Buddy Rich? What did you sort of take from that first experience hearing him play drums?
Well, first I want to say that as an engineer and as a musician, I was never a prodigy. Okay, it was just
Okay.
so it's not like I was a prodigy at something and I became. I just I struggled pretty much with everything. Um, but with drums, when I was growing up, when you are kind of different, you got to fit in somehow. And I've learned quickly that playing drums in bands, however horrible they were, made you popular. So I got it was kind of my social connection was playing drums. So it was a very positive experience. So I sought to pursue it, and you think, well, I could do this for a living, and then I mean, there's various reasons why that didn't happen, but seeing Buddy Rich was just so amazing. The mastery that this person had accomplished. He was mechanical almost in his playing and his musicality and the band and the noise and the horns, and it was just insane. It just floored me just seeing all that happen.
Were you always in touch with that's like a pretty humble piece to me that you're not a prodigy at these things. Were you always in touch with that throughout your life?
I couldn't say I knew what a prodigy was, but I struggled. I played basketball until I didn't grow higher than 5'7". So then there goes my basketball career. So it's sort of like one of those things where I'll do it. I'll you know make it till was it fake it till I make it, or I guess whatever. I tried hard, and
Yeah.
I was always disappointed that I couldn't focus as much as the great drummer in school. I mean, there was always a better drummer. There was always a smarter engineer. And they had this phenomenal capacities to focus, or they had just this natural talent or natural athleticism, and I had to think that I had something natural, but it was just exploited in a different way.
Yeah. And how conscious were you of it being sort of like your social like touch point, the drums?
Girls,
Girls. Yeah, that
basically.
made it clear to you.
Yeah, that was just the bottom line.
Yeah.
you know it's interesting because a lot of times you join a prog metal band, and it's funny in Hollywood, there's all these guys out in front going rah, 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 and you ask yourself, what am I here for? I mean, a bunch of guys yelling at you. Just you want to play a band where like Guns N' Roses, that had all the girls. You
Yeah.
want to. But the prog metal band was more virtuosity, a lot more virtuosity involved. So that's kind of what drew me to it. It was more structured, more mechanical. It was more artistic, I thought. So I was in it for the music at the end,
I
not for the
see.
girls.
And what do you think, sort of balancing these two kind of passions or these two ideas about yourself? When you look back over your path, what did it sort of bring to your life? Can you imagine? Can you imagine if you had had one without the other?
Um, yeah, but I kind of imagine it would have been something else. Um, you know, again, well, one thing it did, what in retrospect, I was never prone to addictions, and there was more than enough to go around in the era that I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't want to get into the details of that, but I avoided a lot of hardship simply because I was too busy. Like for example, smoking weed, it makes you a horrible drummer. It kills your time. So why would you do it? Or I can't do calculus. With beer, drinking
Yeah.
beer. You can't drink beer and do calculus or do mathematics. They
Hmm.
don't mix. So it never mixed. It never got. I partied as well as much as the next guy, but it never became a fixture. It never became a. And I think people with well, I don't know, I can't say for sure, but maybe it is so that people who don't know what their locuras are, I call them locuras because in Spanish those are your crazies, those are your delusions. They actually have a word for that.
Hmm.
Um, so if you don't have enough of them, then something's going to take its place, and that could be undesirable. So I consider myself lucky. Um, and then on the other hand, it's a big kind of a fantasy land. So I never, focused and started the next Apple. I wasn't the next, you know, enterprise titan, and I didn't focus so hard on making money. It was all about the coolest project. I would always work on the coolest project I can get my hands on.
Yeah.
Commercial satellites, the B 2 bomber. I worked on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Hollywood. I
Right.
worked on commercial aircraft and I mean, just give me the coolest project. I'm interested, and then money was secondary. So I'm by no means impoverished now, but I'm not a gazillionaire by any stretch either. So take it for what that means. Whatever your goals are. It seems like
Yeah.
the more you're obsessed with something, the least you get it. So
Well, it almost seems like that's sort of a part of your origin story too, is like the sheer coolness of landing on the moon, doing something at that scale, or the coolness of playing the drums like Buddy Rich. Like you just these things also just kind of turned you on, right? And so maybe you're a little in pursuit of that.
yeah. But today I work a lot as an expert witness in courts of law. So I'm a mechanical engineer. I analyze failures. I have to be deposed by attorneys, and you go to trials and you represent clients, and you can't show just the slightest echo of delusion. You have to be so straight, so square, so
Interesting.
on purpose, on focus that you can't show any of this. I can't get up in front of a court and say, "Oh yeah, I wanted to play drums on the moon." It'd just be nowhere. So you have to really watch it. You know,
Dan, you've got so much awareness about your story. I'm wondering how much awareness you sort of had while it was going on, or how much of this you gained sort of in retrospect. Because I will say for myself that, I am a delusional person. I've never had so much clarity as I do right now. But if you talk to me as I was growing up in my 20s, even in my 30s, like I was very in a lot of the delusions. I wouldn't have had the perspective uh, to even talk about them as delusions.
well, I'm looking back at it. Probably, I'm twice your age at least. I'm looking back at it looking back farther than you are, than you could. So maybe that's what you're hearing. But at the time, it was a little frustrating because again, I wasn't did never really found my tribe. On occasion, I never met society's standard of whatever excellence. I can't say that played. I wasn't a prodigy in anything. All I had was my delusions, and that was even back then, it was a bit frustrating, because you would get a job and somebody smarter would get the promotion, or somebody more focused would get the big commission. I don't know. I can't explain it. So, but it was a little bit frustrating being having those delusions and not fully recognizing that they were the thing that were making you happy or keeping you happy.
It seems like you were really kind of a part of two communities, though, the musician community and the engineer community for decades, right?
Right.
And yet you still say that you never found your tribe. Were you aware of that, or did you feel like, I mean, you must have friends in both worlds, I would think, over the years.
I think it was more like, oh yeah, I have friends. Okay, yeah, I got friends all over the place. It's not that, but your lifelong tribe. Like I don't. My high school buddies, I don't communicate with them like most people do. They really stay close to the folks they grew up with. Even my family, I'm not really particularly. I mean, I'm close with them. I mean, as close as you would, but they don't live like next door.
Gotcha.
I live pretty far away, and that might be slightly intentional. Um,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
at one point in my life, when the aerospace industry crashed, um, I had no debt, had some money in my pocket. Aerospace was dead. And music was frustrating, so I said, okay, I'll go to Mexico and I learned the language. And I went to Mexico and I learned the language, and I taught at an engineering school, and I sent the engineers to the American Engineering Board exams, and did this huge study on NAFTA and engineering cross border engineering education, and published papers and stuff. It's like a diversion, but that could not have happened unless I said, oh heck with that, I'll just go to Mexico. Learn a
Yeah.
language. What the hell? Why not? It's that kind of an attitude that opened up the next phase.
How old were you when you learned the language?
I was in my 30s, and it
When
was
you learned
hard.
Spanish?
Yeah, it was not an easy thing to do.
I'll tell you what, that is inspiring to me right now. I've tried to learn Spanish many times in my life, and I have really buckled down this time. I am not going to take no for an answer, and I've been taking my lessons every day, but it is a struggle for me. I'm
Yeah,
by no means this prodigy.
unfortunately, I put myself in a situation where you don't talk, you don't eat, and really, really. And then what happened was I actually met my wife there, and it was completely unintentional. But she was a professor at the university that I was teaching at, and I had to learn, and that's how I learned Spanish basically.
Yeah.
Was speaking that way.
And Dan, you have children too, yeah?
We have one boy. Yeah,
One boy, and does he speak Spanish?
he's working on it. He's working on it.
Yeah.
But
So do
but
you speak it in the house though?
well, we should have done it more. Let's put it that way. And then
Gotcha.
there's a spoken. It's like there's so many different types of Spanish. There's a spoken Spanish. There's a written Spanish. There's the audio Spanish, and then there's the writing Spanish. And unfortunately, what they teach you in school is the written and the writing, and less on the audio and the speaking. But the hardest is the speaking because there's a physiological component to it.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest thing to do, is to speak it, and then hearing it. It sounds like one big long word, and what you're learning in school is how to get that big long word and understand it as a bunch of little words. And once you can do that, you learn super fast. Once you can get that big long word to break down into individual words, then you learn really fast. So that's your goal.
Dan, just a little warning here. I may have somebody else jumping on
Oh, sure.
here. He didn't respond to the email, so but I just wanted to just make sure. I'd love to keep talking if you're available right now. But
Sure.
do I have your permission to share this conversation and in my materials online and the podcast and all that?
Sure. But if you can not share the first one, because I don't want anything to contradict.
Of
Okay.
course, yes. No, totally aligned there. Um, I'm interested. You're engaging me in this conversation about these necessary delusions. And like I say, this is the lens that I see sort of the world through. Or I hear all the people talking to me through their necessary delusions. I hear myself, um, and I'm wondering, you were saying before, you're like, well, you're maybe twice my age, and you've woken up to a lot of these things. I'm wondering, do you still use delusions to drive you? What is your life like today in that respect?
Well, I've tried to separate them out and say, okay, get serious. I got this business, and if I worked harder, I could make more money. But I've got this. I got BoomSpace that I'm working on too, which is my delusion, and that's like the art form. That's the creative section. If you go to the site, you'll see these videos where I take extremely complex subjects and I explain them in an extremely simple way in 1 minute. And if you look at them, these videos, they're really they're interesting, and it takes a lot to simplify a very, it looks like it's something that some kid built or something, but it's extremely difficult to do. And that turns me on. It got me going, and that's how I'm communicating. But if I wasn't constantly thinking about that, I could, grow my business, hire more engineers, you know, get a national account and go off and writing into the sunset. So, it's your original question was, does it still happen? It's almost inseparable. I can't, in order to get one, I have to be doing the other.
Yeah, I think that you referred actually to boom space before as like your natural, or I'm sorry, your necessary creative outlet.
Yes, yes,
So
and that,
why is it necessary?
um, I guess again, it's the bigness, it's the scale, because BoomSpace is a platform that I've specified, and I've published with the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, with won innovation contests awards. So it's not a flippant little deal. It's pretty well developed, and it's a platform that if we build it, we can change the world. Okay, so it would be a new form of exchange among people, so we wouldn't be hacked, addicted to this dollar, and all its little problems. We'd be trading intangible assets instead of tangible. I mean, it's boiling the ocean basically. And I happen to feel that the ocean is quite vulnerable to boiling, but that's me, okay? But it's boiling the ocean. Any VC looks at that and says, "Oh no, this guy's way out there." So, but it's something that I'm fixed with. I have to describe it. I have to expose this vision. On the other side, when you're dealing with a court case, you're channeling through depositions and you're working on the tiniest little fact: who said what, when, where, why, and how, and where's the problem, where's the thesis, where's the hypothesis, how does this go together, and then how do you present that to a mediator or to a jury, or and that's the microcosm. That's really getting into the weeds. So I guess the balance is still there. It just takes a different form.
Do you think that one would thrive if you put down the other?
Um, I've put down the other many times. Every time I do one, I'm putting down the other. So I guess by definition, yes,
Yeah.
but not permanently. I mean, if I was in a struggle, fight or flight thing, I just trash boom space and just get down to business. I mean, it's not like I'm paralyzed by any of it. If I had to go shovel ditches for a living, I'd just go do it.
Yeah. Dan, tell me about yourself. Tell me about the kind of person that you are. How would you describe yourself? The way that you relate to people, your family man. Um, can you give me some sort of broad strokes that way,
Oh,
or
well, I
even in
mean,
the
I
weeds?
don't, I'm not much to talking about myself because I don't study it too much. I don't. I'm not particularly materialistic. I mean, I'm pretty happy. I mean, if I had a lot of money, if I okay, so I remember the day I didn't buy 100 Bitcoin, and today that will be worth X amount of money. And then sometimes you say to yourself, what would me do with money? And it's always about, I'd help a community member, or I'd see a broken fence, and I'd have to replace it because I think it's an important fence. It has to be there, or something, or I don't know. I mean, I don't see. Um, I might buy one fancy car, like an old classic car, but I don't see jets. I don't see yachts. I don't see. I would travel a lot more. I would travel to see places like, you know, like I actually on my work, I went to Uzbekistan once, and I thought that was just amazing. Uzbekistan, there's nothing there, but just if you know anything about history, you know anything about how that all came to be, and you're behind the Iron Curtain. I mean, it's just a phenomenal place to be, and it was that's the kind of stuff that gets me going. So
Yeah.
I guess you the way um, to really analyze yourself is what would you do with power? If you had like infinite power, how would you articulate it? And that would be how you kind of define the best, how you define yourself. So
Yeah. Um, do you have friends that you see on a regular basis?
yeah, they're mostly uh, I've got a couple of friends that were from Boeing. I've got some friends that were their kids were friends with my kid.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly that sort of group, and then I've got professional friends, a bunch of professional friends. They're working on projects in the past, or we collaborate on projects. A lot of them what's interesting is a lot of them are like PhDs from fancy universities, and they're just people. They're just regular people. They're just like me. They've got their locuras, and they're off in the world doing their thing, avoiding their weaknesses and staying in their sweet spots. So that's kind of interesting to see because I don't have a PhD. I have an MBA, and I've got a BSME, but there's always that stigma. Get if a PhD is you know kiss the earth for these characters, but they're just like anybody else, and that's what I found enlightening. The Harvard people or the MIT people doesn't matter. They're all just normal people. They're no smarter, no dumber.
What gets you angry?
Injustice. I mean, what you go to the way, yeah, injustice. I think with I don't want to get into too much of the politics, but I think the politics right now makes me angry, and I don't like the feeling I get when I'm learning about it, when I'm watching YouTube, when I'm staying up with the politics. That's not very it's not a very happy time, I don't think. um,
How about a personal injustice, something you've seen in your real life? Don't talk politics to me, but maybe something, maybe you were treated unfairly or somebody that you know or something. Can you think of an instance that got your blood boiling?
um, Yeah, probably a few. I mean, I've been laid off a few times, but those are all economic usually. And and again, if you're not the star player, there's people who do all the right things. They're like Johnny on point. Johnny, they're like they're making the plays, and a lot of people they cause problems and they come in and solve problems, the same problems that they caused, and they
Hmm.
use that as a way to gain visibility. So when you have like a layoff come through town, those are the guys or girls who stay, and the ones who are just nose to the grindstone are the ones who often are invisible. They're not, nobody knows what you're doing. When I was the account manager for All Nippon Airways, the Japanese airline. The
Hmm.
account manager is the service guy for all their airplanes, and so I had to deal with like 80 Japanese engineers, and they're so sweet and they're so polite, but they were really really tough. So they're tough and all that stuff, but so nobody really sees. So you're handling them, you're managing their problems, but nobody really sees how you do it because it's so intimate with the client.
Yeah.
You can't go to a performance review and say, I did this certain thing, or I treated a certain person a certain way, and that got me this, or I balanced these two conflicting interests against that. They don't want to hear. They want to see the metric, and that's kind
Right.
of gets back to you the way you measure what gets measured gets counted. What doesn't get measured doesn't get counted. So, I guess it goes back to the theme of intangible versus tangible assets. And I trade in intangibles, and there's people who trade intangibles.
Is it frustrating to you trading in intangibles because it doesn't get measured?
Um, yeah, and that's what BoomSpace does. BoomSpace solves the problem, so it's not like I don't complain without also building a solution. So that's why I feel comfortable with complaining about that because I'm also doing something about it. So,
I see. Would you consider yourself an emotional guy?
um, yeah, I cry at movies. It's pretty typical. My kid makes fun of me, and but I don't really like I don't like horror movies. I mean, I don't like the real violent movies at all. I don't watch them. It's not like I have any moral instinct or anything about it. It's just they don't. they'll make me happy. I like comedies. I like stupid, mindless comedies.
Hmm.
That's where I laugh. Belly laugh. That's what I like. And
Yeah.
is that emotional? I guess so. It's
Yeah. Absolutely. Dan, what about what about creature comforts?
oh yeah, you were talking about. I'm never too far from a cup of coffee, and we just came back from Hawaii, so I had the opportunity to try Kona coffee, and that's my new addiction.
Oh,
I have to have Kona coffee now. It's so expensive though that that's not going to last very long. But for now, it's my creature comfort.
nice. How do you like your coffee?
With cream,
Just cream, no sugar?
no sugar, no.
Hot?
Yes,
Always hot.
always hot. Yeah, even in the summertime. In the summertime, you can leave it in the car and it stays hot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
it's pretty insane.
Do you have a mug that you like to drink it from?
Usually, yeah, but I buy the mugs at the thrift store because you can get a brand new Starbucks mug at the thrift store for $10, and you spend $30 at Starbucks. It's not like I can't afford $30. I just don't
Let me
see.
see what you got there. You got a mug there?
Yeah,
Let me see. Oh, you got the to go.
the Washington. I just don't see the point in spending that much money for a mug. But
Sure.
and I don't thrift too much, but it's every once in a while I'll go in there and get something.
Well, Dan, I like I say, really appreciate the conversation. Really appreciate you reaching back out. It was fun to do this, and
And I really appreciate what you're doing because it's kind of inspiring me to, hey, maybe I could do a podcast on BoomSpace. What is your interpretation of BoomSpace? How do you live, react, and play in BoomSpace?
well, how did that land with you, Earth Monster? We are dealing in the intangibles, so it's always hard to tell. Were you able to find a little piece of yourself in Dan's story? If you were, I hope you will get into the comments and share it. Does that feel too vulnerable? Am I asking too much of people? I always love to see the comment section. I always love to see what piece of the conversation did you sort of take away with you, because I think that there is a lot there to hang on to. Dan really seemed to have an understanding, a basic understanding about something of himself when he was very young. This is just identifying himself as an engineer and sort of just hanging on and going with that. It's kind of a crazy way to live your life when you think about it, to just sort of like determine this is who I am and then just keep repeating that until you make it real. I can sort of relate to that. I feel like I identified myself, maybe embarrassingly at this point, as a performer really early on. And I think it is that exact idea that had me feeling a little shipwrecked in my adult life, kind of like looking like I needed to breathe some new life into this old dream. And here it is. I thought that Dan did a great job articulating what it was like sort of navigating between those two worlds. And what I really appreciated was the long, hard look that he was able to provide in himself, that sort of introspection. Can anyone relate to this? Like being able to say, like, I'm not a prodigy in this. I'm not, exceptional at this. I work really hard. Relatable. And I think everything that I do, I wish it all felt a little bit more effortless. And I don't know. Maybe I don't wish that it all felt more effortless. Maybe I've learned to appreciate the work and the effort that I put in. At least that is the story that I'm telling myself these days. So here it comes. Figure out what kind of earth monster you want to be. Get an idea and hang on to it tight like a dog with a bone. Think it, feed it, do it. And please don't forget to subscribe to the show, because I only have this sort of endless parade of compelling conversations coming, and they are so enriching to me. I think they are going to be just as enriching to you. And if you are looking to make that big change, to reinvent yourself, if you are looking to feel more connected, feel more empathetic, I really believe that this is a great way to do it, through simple conversation and hearing from all different types of people. So We will be back next week with more epic, everyday stories of success and redemption. You'll see me next time.